Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for joining me. This is video number 2 out of 6 for no line coloring, the Power Poppy Magnolia Sunshine digital stamp. Now we are already done with Copic coloring in our Magnolias here. I do have that link down below just in case you missed that one. And this one we're going to be coloring in these berries and those daffodils. Let's start on these berries, and I'm going to be starting with the Copic and the BG57. I'm right up there on the tip of my marker, folks. I know it's really hard to see here. In just a moment I'll move my hand and you can check out what I'm doing here. I'm just going in a very lazy C shape right on the bottom edge of these berries. If I have one that overlaps the other, I am trying to make sure that I add this BG57 in a way that I'm not going to make my berries blend together here. So if I have one that is underneath another one, I'll add that BG57 along the top edge of the one that is underneath. The one that is on top, I'll move that shadow to a different position. At the end of the day, this is kind of a small detail. It's not going to be terribly noticeable if you don't get it 100% right. So don't stress out about it too much, folks. Just make sure that you're getting that BG57 in there, because you will need this depth and this shade in there in order to make these appear round when we're done coloring these in. These are really easy to throw together. I am going a little bit slower here so I can give you an idea of what it is I'm doing, so you can get a good shot of what it is I'm doing. When I'm done with that BG57, now I'm bringing in a BG13. I'm going right over the top of that BG57 and bringing it out just a little bit more. I'm not going to leave a whole bunch of white space on these. There's not necessary to do that. I know that I'm going to be bringing in a white colored pencil in later, and I can add a little bit more of that highlight where I need it. And these aren't going to have a whole lot of highlight to them anyways, because they're pretty tiny, so I don't need to focus too much on that. At this point, I'm just trying to get these colored in with this BG13 with just a tiny bit of space left. Now, they are on these really fine little twig type twigs, I suppose. So in order to accommodate for that, I'm not going to use a Copic marker. I am going to use a Staedtler pen, but we'll talk about that here in just a moment. I'm going to finish these off with a BG11, and I'm going right over the top of that BG57 and the BG13. However, I'm not going to focus on them too much, because that BG11 will eat up quite a bit of that BG57 and the BG13, and I don't want to do that. I just need to get it to finish off, and I needed to get it to blend. So here is a dark gray Staedtler pen, and I'm tracing over the lines that are already illustrated in them. Once I have those lines illustrated, there's like these tiny little knots on them, and I'm going to go in with that dark gray and fill in those knots, and then we're going to call that good. I'm going to move on to these daffodils, and the first thing I want to do is I want to color in the stamen, and I'm not going to color them in traditionally with a Copic marker. They're just too tiny. So I have a darker yellow Staedtler pen, and I'm going right along the edge of it there where I feel like a shadow would be. And then I'm going to finish coloring it in with a lighter yellow Staedtler pen. Right now, these are going to look kind of funky, folks, so don't worry about it too much. We'll work on them some more when the time comes. So it's time to start coloring in the petals of our daffodil here. I am starting with a Y21. I'm going right down there at the base of this. Now, some of these lines are already illustrated in the image, and that's awesome. These are super easy to follow. I'm basically going to go right over the top of those illustrated lines with that Y21. This is going to be my darkest shade color. It doesn't feel very dark, but trust me, it will be dark enough when we're done coloring this in. I did look at several references of trumpet daffodils, and the ones that stood out to me the most were those more delicate yellow ones, and they were a really lovely complement to that red violet in these magnolias. So that's why I chose this blending combination. When I was done with the Y21, then I come in with a Y11, go right over the top of that Y21, bring it out just a little bit more, and I'm going to finish this off with a Y00. Do not scrub at this, folks. This Y00 will eat the Y11 and a good majority of that Y21. Now, I just refilled my Y00 right before I did this video, so I do have quite a bit of ink in it, and it is knocking back more of that Y11 than what I would prefer. Not a problem. While that ink is still wet, I come back in with that Y11, go back over the top of that Y21, bring it out where I had it to begin with, and then I'm going to walk away from it. I'm going to call it good. I don't need to do any more than that right now because, again, I can always come back later and adjust for it a little bit more, and in fact I do, but we'll talk about that here when the time comes. So these daffodils aren't super big, and these colors are light enough that I'm still going to get a blend out of them. So I'm going to go through on the rest of these petals all with the Y21. I start right there at the base of that petal, and I can see where those lines are already illustrated in it. So I'm capitalizing on those, and I'm going right over the top of those fine, thin lines that are illustrated right up the center of these petals. And then there's also the folds and the movement at the very tips of the petals themselves. I'm adding that Y21 in there. It's going to give that bend and that movement, that visual texture when these daffodils are done being colored in, and I really, really want that. That really makes them way more interesting, and it makes them look more dimensional as well. After I'm done with that Y21, again, I come back in with that Y11, go right over the top of that Y21. For the most part, I'm right up there on the tip of my marker. These, I'm going to stay more on the tip than what I would on, say, what I did on those magnolias, because these are delicate colors and these colors want to eat away at one another. So I don't want to oversaturating it by putting too much pressure on my Copic marker and getting too much ink onto the paper, but I still need to make sure that I'm getting a blend out of it. So I am making sure there's at least enough Copic on there to get that blending happening without eating away at it. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, while you're coloring this in, you're still going to notice those light gray lines from our printing, and that's fine. Don't worry too much about those, because as we finish coloring in the rest of this image, the things that we color in around it are going to be dark enough that it's going to distract away from those lines, and then whatever is left, you're not going to notice it because you have everything else going on in the image. Now, these are very delicate yellows, and it's going to be really hard to tell yourself to just keep going with these. You're going to want to go darker to cover up those lines to get to that no line feel for it. Resist the urge, folks. It is okay. We'll deal with it all when the time comes. Plus, this yellow is one of my favorite blending combinations ever. I think I was inspired to use this from the Vanilla Arts Cheers workshop. I don't remember 100% off the top of my head. I will look into that and link that down below so you can go check that out. But this is just such a gorgeous yellow combination, and you can absolutely change this up depending on what other colors you decide to use on your colored pencils later, and that is even better. I love blending combinations that I can use universally, and I can get different looks out of them depending on what colored pencil combination I use on top. So at this point, I'm done coloring it in. I'm going to kind of just let it sit for a minute and decide if I need to do anything else with it before I do anything else with it. Just kind of let it sit there and be chilling like Bob Dylan. I'll deal with it in a moment. And I'm also not going to deal with the center of the trumpet of that daffodil. I will deal with both of those when I am done coloring everything else in. It doesn't matter. It's not a priority right now. I'm going to color this one in the same way as I did the first one. This one, it was illustrated with a few more of those bends and folds in the tips of those petals, and I love that. So I'm definitely making sure I'm getting that Y21 in there. These petals that are underneath, petals that are next to them, I'm making sure that I add that Y21 there where they meet up. It's going to feel like it's not going to make too much of a difference because this Y21 is a light color, but add it in there anyways, folks. You need that. Even with the colored pencils on top of it, you need to have that extra layer of color when we go to add our shading in later. It's going to make a huge difference, even if it doesn't feel that way right now. So I have this petal here that has some lines illustrated there at the tip. So I added some of that Y21 on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side. And you can see right there in the middle where I don't have any color yet. Stick with me. You'll see how that turns out. This is a really great way to add more of that visual texture. On that petal, I just had it on the left-hand side or the bottom edge of the tip of that petal. So I added it there. On this one, it's just going to be on the right-hand side of it. I am looking for those illustrated lines in there, and that's where I'm adding that. Now I made sure that I added that Y21 where this Magnolia petal is hanging over this daffodil. Again, it doesn't feel like it's going to make a difference, but it will in the end, so do be sure that you're adding it there. I'm also making sure that I get down into the center of this daffodil as much as I possibly can, even though it's kind of wavy and jagged from the trumpet of it. I need to get that color down in there. Now, do remember, folks, that we are looking straight down into this daffodil. So it would be like if we were standing right above it and we were getting a bird's eye view right directly down into it. That's what we're looking at on these. The centers of these trumpets, they're going to have some shade and some depth to them because they're actually kind of hollow, or I suppose they are hollow in the center of them. So we need to think about that while we're coloring this in. Now, it's not going to seem like we're doing a whole lot here. We're accomplishing a whole lot here, but we have more work that we're going to do to this, and we'll get to that look to it here in the end. After I was done with that Y21, I'm coming in with the Y11, and I'm just going to work my way around this daffodil just like I did the other one. I am not worried about this drying back too far. I am going a little bit faster on this than what I had in my Magnolias. I know that I'm going to get these colors in there without this drying too much on my paper. If you're working any slower than what I am right now, then definitely take one at a time, even with these light colors. But these light colors can definitely save your bacon if you're working too slow. So either way, don't stress out about it too much. All right, once I was done with that Y11, now I'm coming in with that Y00, going right over the top of the 21 and the 11 and finishing this off. I did not leave any white on these daffodils. That is absolutely not necessary. This Y00 is a light enough color that we can definitely use this as our highlight color. Also, if you feel like you want any more of those sharper, brighter highlights on your daffodils, you can always bring in a white colored pencil later. I don't. I feel like it would have been just a wee bit too much contrast, but I definitely understand the need to want to build up those sharper white highlights on this bright yellow. So this one is going to be a little bit different because this one's kind of off to its side. So you can see the shape of the trumpet. Now those other two daffodils, they have the same shape. They're just in a different position. So on this one, I need to get that Y21 in with the top edge of that trumpet where it is the jagged edge of the trumpet is kind of hanging over the trumpet itself. I have these leaves that are kind of hanging down here. I need to get that Y21 in there. This Magnolia is also overhanging this a little bit. There would be just a little bit of shade or shadow in there. This one, I'm going to add the Y21 right up the center there, and I kind of bring it up a little bit further than what I had on the rest because I want to make this one look like it's kind of bowed in on itself. This one is kind of twisted on itself, so I'm adding that Y21 where everything is hanging over onto itself, where it's kind of cupped in there and along that edge there. Then I'm going to bring in my Y11, and I'm just going to repeat the same thing that I had done on my other daffodils. I'm going to go right over the top of that 21, bring it out just a little bit. I am leaving a decent amount of white space here, folks, to leave or to finish off that Y00, but I'm going to talk about that more here in just a moment because I know that I can help reinforce some of this depth and shade in here before I even get to my Copic coloring. And now that I've had a chance to look at the other ones, I definitely feel like there's a little bit more work to be done. But I'll get to that here in just a moment. Now, one of the reasons why I left the insides of these trumpets alone is because I needed to come up with a plan. I wasn't entirely certain how I wanted to attack this, and I'm not 100% certain the way I did it was maybe the best way. It gets the job done and it looks fine. I just wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do with them. So that was kind of one of those things that I put off to the back of my mind while I was coloring it in, and then I could deal with it when I was ready to do so. Now that these had a moment to dry back, I am coming back in with this Y11, and I am going to go in just a little bit more. It felt like now that everything was dry, they were looking a little too on the light side, and I wasn't a big fan of that. There is a little bit of a difference, and there's going to be a little bit of a difference here because I did give those other colors time to dry. So I went in with wet ink over dry ink, and it is going to make it a little bit darker, and that was just enough to make me happy. All right, so now I'm ready to start coloring in my trumpets, and I'm not going to lie, folks, I kind of wing it, so bear with me. I start with my Y21 to color in those little fine illustrated lines, and then I decided that A, my Copic's too fat, and B, it's not giving me the definition that I want. So I actually come in with a yellow Stettler pen. This is a fairly bright Stettler pen, and I trace those lines on this trumpet daffodil and the one next to it. I do this on the one that is off to the left there. I kind of trace that backwards C shape with it. Now I am going to bring in a darker Stettler pen here soon, and by the way, ignore the numbers on my pens. They don't mean anything to you folks. It's just something I do for my own personal reasons, so don't worry about those. Just look for colors. I'm also going to take this pen, and where these trumpets they're kind of jagged along the edges there, they kind of go in these loops, or these, well, yeah, loops, I suppose. I'm going right in between those with that yellow Stettler. Now, I do end up coming in again with a darker one, and you'll see more of what I'm talking about here in just a moment. Now I have my Y11, and I'm thinking I'm still going to go over the top of that yellow Stettler to get this to kind of mix a little bit. It's not quite right. I'm not super happy with it. I do know that I need to come in with my Y21 here, and everything that I have colored in with those darker Stettlers, I'm going right in between those. I know eventually what I'm looking for is to have some depth and darkness in the inside of these trumpets, because they would have some depth and darkness. But I'm still trying to decide if I'm going to accomplish this with Copics or if I'm going to do it with colored pencils. I'm starting to lean towards colored pencils because now at this point I have my Y00, so I'm just going to finish coloring in all of it and make it light. And then I can come in with my colored pencils, which is a dry medium that I can get to a sharp point and get that detail and work up to what it is I'm trying to accomplish with those. Plus, if I don't like it, I still have the advantage of being able to erase it. However, once I get this Y00 on here, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking that I could add just a little bit more definition to some of these areas with a Stettler pen. So I have a little bit darker yellow Stettler pen. I think this is the same yellow. It's the lightest yellow that I had done on those stamen. So I'm coming in with a Stettler pen and I'm just going in over those little fine little lines with it, and then where these loops are just on the inside of those. So when the loop itself comes up and over, I ignore the up and over part and I just go in underneath where it loops under. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, do be sure to check out the photos because you can actually see a whole lot better what I'm talking about. Now, what I'm doing with this is I am getting in just those fine shaded points. This definitely helps give me that definition between the daffodil itself and the trumpet. So especially those ones that we're looking right over the top of, that gives me some separation in there and that helps define some of that shape. And that is all I need right now. I will work on the rest of it with my colored pencils, and that is it for the berries and daffodil Copic coloring. Next up, we have the branches, snowdrops, greenery, and cast shadow Copic coloring in video number 3. I shall see you there.